Theosophical Society, Point Loma, the second lecture on the insanity of war, time to act like humans again. And today's talk is entitled The Alchemical Transformation of War to Peace. As you have come to expect from us, the talk is divided in 3 parts of more or less 20 minutes each. And after each part is a short break of 3 minutes in which you can ask your questions. And those questions I will try to answer after that break. First, we are going to talk about the inner alchemy. And then in the second part, we are going to talk about unity. And in the third part, we are going to talk about reconciliation. And reconciliation is very difficult because people are often reluctant to acknowledge their own mistakes, nor do they want to apologize for what they have done wrong. The personal human tends to stick to his point of view, and if there is any disagreement with others, few are willing to critically evaluate their own point of view, and if they have treated the other wrongly, then often they don't want to say sorry, as sorry seems to be the hardest word according to a song. And it is true of quarrels within a family, fights between families and groups. Yes, it applies equally to the world stage. Apologize or accept apologies, relate to your enemy again in a friendly way seems to be the hardest thing in the world. How to reconcile with your enemy again, how to transform enmity into friendship. And we emphasize the word transform because tonight's talk is about an alchemical transformation. And actually, this is a pleonasm because alchemy is to transform. It's a conversion process, a process in which iron is converted into gold. The base metal transforms into the precious metal. Such a similar transformation can take place in a human being. The base, if I may call it so, is transformed into the precious or the noble. And that process can also take place collectively among humanity. So waging war, aggression and violence can be transformed into kindness, helpfulness and peace. That's a process that does require perseverance and patience, because just as you cannot at once turn all the iron in this world into gold, you can do the same with the entire world population. That conversion process is, in other words, a process that requires a lot of time and effort, a lot of patience, but it can be done. Now, each individual human being does not have to wait for humanity to change. Every person who wants to turn hostility and war into the gold of peace will have to go through such a transformation process within themselves. It's actually quite simple. War is made by humans, by the ignoble, the selfish within man, and peace is equally made by humans, the noble, the selfless within man. So we must transform the ignoble, the selfish into the precious, the noble, and the selflessness in man. That is also the actual meaning of alchemy. It's not so much about turning metals into gold, although that is possible in principle, but it is to conjure up the golden light, the golden sun, the deity within yourself. And the search for the elixir of life, allowing you to live forever, which is so strongly associated with alchemy and about which such fantastic stories are told, the elixir of life shouldn't be thought of so much as a magic potion. No, it has a profound symbolic meaning. The alchemist of antiquity were ascetics, philosophers in the purest sense of the word. They knew better than anyone else that everything in this outer world passes away, is temporary, and that therefore you can never live forever in this world. The eternal life, the elixir of life, should be sought in the eternal element within yourself. That principle of consciousness that rises above the temporality of life. That eternal element was what the alchemists were looking for. And they knew that that eternal element was within themselves. Don't think the alchemists of antiquity, nor those of India or China, or those of Alexandria, who had so much influence on the Arabs who brought alchemy to medieval Europe. Don't think the ancient alchemists, the true alchemists, had any interest in gold. To them, a stone or a lump of gold had equal value. They did not value wealth or luxury in any way. The transformation of iron using the philosopher's stone and the search for the elixir of life was a symbolic representation of an inner process. And although the outer alchemy is not nonsense, it is secondary to, and so is much, much less important than the alchemy that can take place in us, in our consciousness. This can be seen very clearly by the Chinese alchemist who seems to go back to the great Chinese sage Lao Tzu. There was a form of alchemy in ancient China which was called Weidan, an alchemy that took place in a laboratory. And there was the spiritual alchemy called Naidan. And the latter form was also practiced by the Buddhists of China who drew on very ancient Buddhist texts of Nagarjuna, one of the great Indian Buddhist sages. In his writing, he emphasizes purity of mind and the persistence you have to exercise if you want to realize an inner alchemical process. Well, I hope it will be clear that in this lecture we are going to talk about the inner process of transformation that is needed so badly to be able to say sorry, to reconcile with your perceived enemy, to turn war into peace. And we will sometimes use the terms of alchemy in the hope that we can thereby make it clear how that individual process of alchemy in our consciousness may also eventually lead to a different world situation in which war is transformed into peace. Well, although there are many, especially medieval writings written down by charlatans, would-be alchemists who built on half understood Arabic writings, which in turn had their sources in Hermetic writings, nevertheless, all these alchemists assume that to obtain gold, you have to convert the base metal into a primal substance, and that primal substance underlies all different substances. So they were looking for a homogeneous substance from which all elements were derived. Theosophy endorses that such a primal substance exists. We call it mula prakriti, or the root substance. Sometimes it is called prakriti, the basic substance, the substance from which the entire hierarchy of life is built. Theosophy teaches that this primal substance, that original matter, really exists. It exists on several levels because there are different cosmic worlds. It goes far too far to go into that now. By the way, always imply that matter, substance, is not dead or inanimate. Theosophy knows no dead substance. Everything is alive. That's an important thought. Well, the alchemists said that you can get that primal substance by purging the base metals of the junk which scattered around it. Had that worked out, then you could distill from that primal substance the precious metal gold. You then capture the essence of gold, so to speak. In the Chandogya Upanishad, one of the most sacred scriptures of India, the guru, the teacher, teaches his students that to know gold, you could collect all the golden objects and then try to know its characteristics. But it is much more efficient, of course, to get to the essence of gold. Because if you know the essence, you also know the nature of all golden objects. Thus, the alchemists went to the essence of the elements, the homogeneous substance, that primordial matter, which is actually the same as the elixir of life. Of that elixir of life, it is not only said that it extends life, that it makes you live forever, but also that you can cure all diseases with it. Well, man too must go to the primordial matter within himself. That is the colorless, superpersonal, universal element from which he emerged. You can call it the One. Brahman, the Upanishads say, the inside of the inside. And what prevents men to perceive the One, or rather to be the One, from which he is a ray, from which he is an emanation? That is the base metal, to use the alchemical term. And what then is the base metal in man? What needs to be purified? What needs to be stripped of all ballast and dirt that has attached to it over the course of evolution? And the answer is, that's the human personality, the personal ego, consciousness characterized by the I am I feeling, which leads to selfishness. It is selfishness that prevents us from recognizing what and who we really are, the elixir of life that we are, that which cures all diseases, which harmonizes all disharmonies, because it is the essence of being, it is the inner God. It is good to know that person and personality are derived from the Latin word persona, which means mask. That means there is something that is greater, more real than the mask, the personality, something that makes use of it. There is, in other words, a deeper, greater human power who puts on a mask. This image is taken from the Greek plays where the actors imply a mask in front of them so the audience could see who that actor represented. Thus, we humans have a mask in front of us. That mask is our personality, the role we play in the external field, the role of carpenter or computer expert, the role of father, mother, neighbor, whatever. But behind that role is the true human being, the real man who survives death, which we call the reincarnating ego. 2 weeks ago, we have already told you, perhaps ad nauseum, that outer man, the personal human being, often lives in the sense of separateness. He thinks he is separate from others and assigns a full reality to the outer world. That means he connects himself with it. As a result, he becomes contaminated or polluted with all kinds of earthly lees, just as the base metal of the alchemist is contaminated and polluted. Look, in itself, the personal ego is not bad. It's a limited form of consciousness, which does not extend beyond the earthly realm. But that doesn't make the personality bad. Only when man is tied by selfishness with all kinds of things, with all kinds of thoughts and ideas, he becomes, as it were, polluted with the mud of the earthly kingdom. For it are thoughts by which the personal man pollutes himself. Or let's specify that. It are thoughts that come from, find their nourishment, and originate in the feeling of separateness. Thoughts are not merely brain activities. Thoughts are living beings that attach themselves to people who provide them with nourishment. And the nutrition we give them is attention. In other words, when we think a thought, we focus our consciousness on it. So thinking a thought is actually perceiving a thought being. And a thought being is very primitive, is an elemental being, but nevertheless a living entity who can grow and can attach itself to consciousness, the thinking consciousness that perceives it and therefore thinks. And it is by thinking a thought, focusing on our consciousness on it, that that thought is growing. It is by means of our thoughts, the thoughts we think, that we make ourselves, create ourselves, but also shape our environment. And the more we think thoughts of earthly quality, so to speak, that is, thoughts that are focused on the external world, the more strongly we connect with that world. And we forget that the personality is actually the mask, and that the true man is hidden behind that mask. And as a result, we live in the sense of separateness, and we forget the true human being. We forget that we are actually a spiritual being that temporarily resides in this outer world. We so much identify with our role on the outer stage that we forget that we are the actor and not the role that we play. It is this mentality that leads to enmity, because we no longer realize that all human beings are interconnected. It is this base material, to put it in the terms of alchemy, that we need to ennoble, we need to purge, we must elevate to the universal, to the one, to the divine source from which we spring and who we actually are. We must learn to think other thoughts, for it is not thinking per se that pollutes us and makes us attach ourselves to the outer world. It is a certain type of thought, the personal thought, that makes us live under the delusion of being separate from others. Especially if this vision is professed collectively. So when you breed a collective sense of separateness, then that can all too easily lead to war. After all, thinking a thought also means transmitting a thought. And that is, you transmit an impulse that another human being who is tuned in the same wavelength, so to speak, can pick up. Especially if you don't think about things independently, if you are what we call an unself-conscious thinker, then you may easily and quickly think thoughts of others while assuming you are thinking your own thoughts. Have you ever wondered how it is possible that a certain trend, a certain fashion can move around the earth very quickly? Certainly, social media play a role in this, but what actually happens, just like the spread of bacterium or a virus is that a thought settles into the thinking consciousness of many people. Unconscious as one thinks, one transmits that thoughts again so that other people catch it as well. Of course, you can only catch that thought if your thinking, your mind, is tuned to the same frequency. Someone who is impersonal and as an idealist tries to improve everyone's life will never catch a thought of hatred towards others. Just like when your radio is tuned to radio 1, you don't receive the program of radio 2. But because many people think from their personality, feeling separated, a psychic epidemic may arise. And suddenly neighbors who lived peacefully side by side for years become enemies of each other and are at each other's throats. You know, that's not a theory. It happened in the former Yugoslavia, it happened in Rwanda, and it happened on a large scale. Of course, in both cases, people were incited by fanatics. In Yugoslavia, the source of hate can be identified as a radio station that began pouring that dangerous mental dirt into the country and infect people. Things like nationalism, racial delusion, and religion that make people live in a collective sense of superiority. Religion in particular can stir up selfish emotions because religion, the perceived exaltedness of one's religion, can top the feeling of separateness when a so-called holy sows as if the god or the gods are behind your selfish aggression. And although it may sound crazy, this kind of collective delusion, also that of religion, is fueled by materialism. And by that I mean especially that an excessive value is placed on externals, a symbol, a boundary, a nationalistic sign, a church. Did people in India never fight to the death for a place where Muslims had a mosque and that Hindus wanted to claim for building a temple dedicated to one of the many gods? Appearances. For neither the outer temple nor the mosque or the place where it should be located has everything to do with spirituality. Well, the thought garbage, the mental lees, the mire and mud of personal thoughts, which attach themselves to the personality, prevent the alchemical transition of the personality into the gold of the inner God, into the pure divinity within each of us. This alchemical transition is an individual matter. Everyone has to do it for themselves. We can encourage and inspire each other though, but I can do it for you and you cannot do it for me. Are we succeeding in that transition? Then we achieve the inner peace of mind. And the more people are better able to do so, nations will increasingly live as friends with each other. After the break, with the help of our Theosophical teachers, I will provide some guidance on how to accelerate that transformation and thereby make the transition from war to peace. But first there is a break, 3 minutes, ask your question, and after the break, I will try to answer them. Welcome back. Henk.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah, Barend. I have one question, and it is this. Can you state that wars may arise from the accumulation of all little, small, local arguments and misunderstandings between people? So a kind from micro to macro effect.
Well, I think misunderstanding is not enough, because you can disagree with each other, you cannot understand each other, and in the same time respect the other opinion, or you think, well, maybe I'm not wise enough to understand him, or maybe we are not on the same level. Anyway, it's not the real cause, but misunderstanding. If you think, for instance, that the other is stupid because he doesn't understand it, because you are right, etc., then it may be the cause for a quarrel. And in fact, and that is true, I think, wars in general start, on a little scale. And so the mentality of people and mentality of a nation, the enmity of one nation to another nation, all those things help to create enmity between countries, and that may eventually lead to war. So in that way, I agree with it. But misunderstanding may be solved. Yeah, if there is a misunderstanding between two people, you can talk about it and be open and listen to the other, and then the misunderstanding can be solved.
True, yeah. And also in the question, there was also not only misunderstandings, but small arguments and fights.
Yes,
so in fact,
that is,
already the neighbor
yes,
problems, and so that is a little bit more in the direction, I think.
yes. I didn't
Yeah.
get that idea. Yes, but in the quarrels and the fights, of course, yeah. I mean, what happened in the Western world, in many countries, that the population is divided and they don't listen to each other, and one is stick to one idea and the other to another idea, and that is a fountain source for war. I mean, war not necessarily between countries, but war in one country, a kind of civil war, because if you are not willing to listen to the other, and if you stick to your own opinion and don't even have the openness of mind to accept that another person may have another opinion, yeah, of course, that lead to all kinds of disharmonies.
That was the question.
What was the question?
Great.
All right. Then we go to the second part, the unity. We have tried to make it clear in the previous talk and in this talk in the beginning that selfishness arising from the personality and living in the sense of separateness leads to aggression. And the opposite of separateness is unity. And that's what we are going to talk about now. That there is unity may not be obvious to every person, but that there are interconnections between human beings, I'm sure almost everybody, maybe everybody, will agree. After all, we have friends and family too. And hopefully that friendship is based on mutual respect or love. But how do we get our enemies then? Well, that has everything to do with karma, and especially with the two karmic binding forces about which we also spoke in the other talk 2 weeks ago, albeit rather briefly. There are two attractors, love and hate. Although hate paradoxically attracts because it repels. See, we just talked about thoughts as living beings. Thoughts tend to recur cyclically to the one who thought that thought. Now, if you think thoughts of resentment and irritation and antipathy, they will come back. If you don't remove the energy from them, so you keep thinking them, you don't give those thoughts of resentment or of hatred another positive impulse, then those thoughts will increasingly control your thinking. Hatred is always directed to others. So those thoughts of hate bind you to the one you hate. And the same applies to people you like or love. So you choose your own friends and your own enemies. And note that bond between people, whether based on love or hate, does not fall away after death. After death, you are yourself. And when you are born again and drawn to your family, your country, the entire environment where you belong, then you will naturally find your own friends and enemies again. So you end up with your family and friends. You end up in a district of a city, in a particular country with which you have ties from the past, and that country may be at odds with another country, or your family may be at odds with another family. It's all karma. Perhaps you have had the experience that you are meeting someone for the first time, and immediately you feel an incomprehensible sympathy for him or her. Or, on the contrary, you feel an antipathy. You have never seen him or her in this life, but you immediately like him or her, or you dislike him right away. Weird? No, not weird. That is the enemy or the friend you choose for yourself in precious life. So the way you treat people determines whether they will be your friends or enemies in the next life. According to William Quine Judge, the second leader of the Theosophical Society, if you have behaved towards another in a hostile manner, that is a friendly and brotherly way, it will take at least 3 lives for the other person to overcome the tendency in himself to behave in a hostile manner towards you. So when we meet someone now who is hostile to us, most likely we have treated him unkindly in a previous life. And if we answer his amity with new amity, then that amity will last to the length of many, many lives. If we do not answer his amity with amity, but with friendship, then it will probably take only 2 more lives before that enemy karma is worked out. We have begun the process of turning amity into friendship. And if we are incapable of friendship, at least let us not be enemies then. Let's be neutral then, so that at least the amity does not increase. William Judge therefore advises us that we need to behave humanely towards those people who are hostile to us, so that in one lifetime we can reduce enmity by at least 1/3, and we can have fully restored harmony after 3 lifetimes. So we choose now for our friends or enemies in the next life. We take care of it now, that people will help or oppose us in the future. And therefore we must be good, even, yes, especially to our enemies. These thoughts can be found in all religions. For example, does not appear in the Sermon of the Mount that there is no merit, and I paraphrase, to love your neighbors or your friends, but that you must love your enemy. In other words, show compassion towards those who are not well disposed towards you. Lao Tzu, the Chinese sage, says, those who are good, I'm good to them. Those who are not good, I'm also good to them, so that they may become good. a similar thought. If we were to give in to the irritation that some people may arouse in us, then we would imply the amity longer. Yes, perhaps we strengthen the amity. And that means that not only in this life, but also in the next life, we will face all kinds of obstacles and pitfalls and opposition from people without understanding where this comes from. Our personality often wants to justify itself. All unpleasantness in life it blames on others. And therefore, we start criticizing others, perhaps only in thought. Maybe we gossip about them, we rebuke them, or even verbally or physically attack them. You know, small causes can lead to big consequences if they are not corrected. If we would have the wisdom to see into a future life, and we would experience how unkindness towards others, the unwillingness to help others, antagonizing the other, how all this would lead to all kinds of discomfort and suffering causing states in the next life, if we knew it, we would probably treat each other differently. Compassion and charity, as St. Paul also says in his famous letter to the Corinthians, benefits not only the other, it also ultimately works in our favor, although this should never be the motive for that behavior. Well, what applies for individuals also applies for groups of people, for nations. If you have to practice love and compassion in a small way towards your fellow man, then the same applies to groups, to nations. Reasoned from karma, it is foolish to think you can overcome your enemy. You can beat him. That's possible because you are stronger, you are more powerful, you have strong friends, you have better arms. But then that enemy is still there, albeit suppressed. And when the opportunity presents itself, it will strike back. You can overcome your enemy only if you overcome yourself, for he who conquers his enemy is strong. But he who conquers himself is wise. And with this knowledge, look at all conflicts in the world, large and small. Take the years-long conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. From the knowledge of Theosophia, we must conclude that this conflict, the conflict between groups of people, goes back many lives. And note, it doesn't have to be that way that those two hostile nations had also embodied themselves as Jew and Muslims in a previous life, or as Israelis and Palestinians. That's only the outward form. That is the vehicle of the human soul. But those human souls, those thinkers, they have, if I see it correctly, already lived many lives in amity with each other. And because hate is a binding factor, they are drawn to each other again and again and again. Each new act of aggression, yes, every thought of irritation, hatred, and violence, but also of fear, makes the bond even stronger. The amity for the next life is already deeply embedded in the consciousness of both nations. And how sad it is when you look at the great ignorance on both sides of this Middle East conflict. Do you really think that if you kill the enemy, that the war, the problem, the conflict is resolved? Of course not. You kill only the body of your enemy. His consciousness, man himself, is still there. And in the next life, we will be drawn to the enemy with even more hatred because that enemy killed him in the previous life. Moreover, if you kill a young man, the natural processes of dying do not take place. In natural cases, someone dies, that is, the body dies, disintegrates, when the consciousness withdraws and one gets his deserved rest. But in martial violence, where young people are killed by bombs or bullets, that natural process is disrupted. These people killed on the battlefield or people killed by bombing will remain in the earthly sphere for some time to come, in the lower parts of what Theosophical calls the astral region. Picture this. The enemy killed a young man of about 20 years in a bombing raid. He was full of zest for life, full of vitality, also full of hatred towards the enemy. In that astral world, will he not have a strong tendency to return to Earth? Will he not be able to exert a certain influence on what happens on Earth with even more hatred and resentment? Have you ever noticed that the terror group of Islamic State, a group that indulged in truly unprecedented atrocities and was driven by a hatred bordering on insanity, that group could arise after the United States and other Western powers invaded Iraq and have tortured thousands of people. A kind of reckoning took place with the old clique around Saddam Hussein, and tens of thousands of people were killed, mostly hanged. Saddam Hussein was also hanged. But do you think people who were executed, so they died in full consciousness, they must have looked death in its face, full of horror, fear, and hatred? Will they not have tried to exert an influence, obviously a very negative influence, on poor, ravaged Iraq after they died? An influence on all those they consider the enemy? And you see, killing your enemy does not make your enemy disappear. As crazy as it may sound, enemies belong together. They choose each other. And you can, as William Church so clearly points out, only change enmity by changing your own view of that perceived enemy, and not by killing him. Killing the other strengthens the enemy bond. Well, the numbers exactly, I don't think anybody knows them, but in about 1 year, more than 50,000 people have been killed in Gaza, and several thousand Israelis have also died as a result of war. Will these people, whose body were killed, change their ideas towards the enemy? Will they have become milder towards the enemy? Of course not. They will be attracted with even more hatred in the next life to those who killed them. And therefore, any attempt to break the downward spiral and having compassion with the so-called enemy is a far greater step towards peace than any bomb. We once posted an article in Lucifer, the Lightbringer, about the Parents Circle Families Forum. This is an Israeli-Palestinian non-profit organization of more than 600 families, all of whom have lost a family member to the ongoing conflict. The main goal is to bring together grieving people from both groups and letting them tell the stories. Palestinians and Israelis explain to each other why they choose dialogue instead of revenge. And you can imagine that this is not an easy task for those involved. You just might have lost your son or daughter because of the other party. Yet you can understand, just on the basis of reason, that revenge or retaliation can never lead to a solution. Do not resist evil with evil is not an empty phrase. The esoteric background of this saying lies in the doctrine of karma, because if you did resist evil with evil, you create even more evil, even more misery, more conflict, both in this life and the next life. So the first step is already the reasonable recognition, you might even call it pragmatic, that revenge serves no purpose and only adds to the misery. And the next step, and that one might be a lot more difficult, is that you learn to love the other person, that you really, from your heart, wishing him or her well. That is the true alchemy of war to peace. Now, alchemy, as mentioned, worked like this, at least where material alchemy was concerned. One goes first to primal matter, the undifferentiated substance. In the alchemy of consciousness, this means that you must first go to the idea of oneness, to the primal source from which differentiation arises. How do you arrive at an idea of oneness? There are several meditation techniques for that, all of which lead to that you develop a mental image of oneness for yourself. Think about universal brotherhood. What does the world look like when people live and work together as brothers? A very good meditation exercise to achieve oneness is given to us by William Quine Church. We talked quite often about this in our lectures, but in connection with the transformation from war to peace, I want to present the idea of church to you in detail. You can find this idea in the book Letters That Have Helped Me. In it, Church writes to a young theosophist, his disciple. I will submit this letter to you in full and provide it with some commentary. Church writes, I am not separated from anything. I am that which is. That is, I am Brahma. And Brahma is everything. But I live in a world of illusion. And I am surrounded by certain phenomena that makes me seem to be separated. So I will go ahead and mentally identify and accept that I am all these illusions. Comment. Church states that the world of illusion is the world in which the personality lives. That personality thinks, if he relies only on his senses, to be separated from others. After all, your senses make you live in the illusion that you have nothing to do with others. But when you start to understand that this is not true, you must devise for yourself a method to learn to understand the unity of life. And Church, here in this letter, calls that oneness Brahma. You may also call it the one, or whatever name you like. The consequence of being that oneness is that you are everything. And therefore, Church continues, I am my friends. And then I went in thought to them in general and to each individually. I am my enemies. Then I felt them all. I am the poor and the wicked. I am the ignorant one. Those moments of intellectual despair are the moments on which I am influenced by those ignorant, who are me. all this in my country, but there are many countries, and I go there in my thinking. I feel them and be them, all with what they possess of superstition or wisdom or evil. All of this is myself. Unwisely, I was then about to stop, but the whole is Brahma. So I went to the Devas and Asuras, and that is the gods and the demons, the world of the elementals. That too is myself. Comment. This is a pretty easy exercise that everyone can do. You don't have to be a bodhisattva for that or an adept, or to know the secret doctrine like the back of your hand. No, you just have to review in your mind all the life, all the beings you know, and try to realize that you yourself is that life. Church continues. After pursuing this course well, I found it easier to return to a contemplations of all men as myself. It's a good method and ought to be pursued, for it is a step towards getting the contemplation of the all. I skip here a sentence, and Church concludes. Now, what does all this insanity sound like? I tell you what. If it were not for this insanity, I would go insane. But shall I not take heart, even when a dear friend deserts me and stabs me deep, when I know that he is myself? This last paragraph is sometimes forgotten when we give this quote, whereas this last paragraph is of the utmost importance, especially in the light of reconciliation and transforming war into peace. I will not go into the historical context of this quote here now, but as was the case with many teachers in Theosophy, they are often betrayed. Loyal friends and associates become sworn enemies. This was also the case with Church. But what does he say? But shall I not take heart, even when a dear friend deserts me and stabs me deep, when I know that he is myself? Like the best fight against fire is prevent fire from starting, so the best reconciliation with your enemy, ensuring that the enemy does not arise. And this is possible because you have to know that the enemy is yourself. I quite understand that you cannot at once realize that the other person is yourself. That takes practice. You have to train yourself for years to think these kinds of thoughts. You have to quietly build that image of unity. The requirements you set for an amateur are not those you ask for a professional. And it may be annoying to think of yourself as an amateur, but that too is a good exercise in impersonal thinking. Anyway, we can start trying to see that the other is ourselves, part of ourselves. We can. If our neighbor is being nasty, or if our colleague is bothering us, at least try to be aware of the fact that he or she too is an essential divine being, and that he or she, just like us, is rooted in the divine heart of the universe. Perhaps the other is even more blind than we are ourselves. We can at least try to see him as human, because no doubt he will also have good qualities. We can also focus on that. The South African poet Breitenbach, who died last week and who was imprisoned for years during the apartheid regime, put it this way. He says, never forget this simple truth. If you deny the humanity of the person opposite you, you are guaranteed to erode your own humanity. We can take an example from someone like Frans Dahl, an ex-prison director. We once put an article about him in our magazine, Lucifer, the Lightbringer. Frans Dahl saw in all the prisoners, whatever terrible things they might have done, first of all, a human being. Don't focus on what somebody has done in the past, but focus on the good aspects which every human being undoubtedly also possesses. You will learn a lot from that, and the other will thereby be inspired to continue working on his noble aspects. This is how you encourage each other in developing insight, humanity, and compassion. And if there is ever disagreement, by focusing on the good in the other, let us all do what we can to reconcile. After the break, we'll give some more practical examples about reconciliation. But first, we start a 3-minute break. Ask your questions, and I will try to answer them after that break. So I see you in 3 minutes. So, welcome back. Henk.
Yeah, Barend. Now I see that already some questions were sent in the former post, but we can have them all.
Okay.
So one of those questions was this: today I heard someone say that the situation in Aleppo is repeating itself. How can these long-term patterns be broken? As a group, where do we start?
We start with ourselves. You start with yourself and I start with myself. So as long as the enmity between the groups exists, there may be a ceasefire for 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years, or 5 years, or 10 years. But if the mentality didn't change, there will be war again. So we have to reconcile with each other. I don't know exactly what's happening now but I heard there was a lot of fights and wars again against the president of Syria, who is of course a very cruel man. But yeah, we have to change ourselves, to change our mind, and then we can change, the country. But as long as that doesn't happen, it's very sad, but war will continue.
Clear? Yeah. Maybe we have here another question.
Just sorry.
Yeah.
I don't want to be very negative, because we should do anything we can to help the others to change their mind, to provide a possibility to negotiation, to start a ceasefire, etc. And that is necessary so that the two parties are able to know each other better, in the hope that they have, because of course, changing your mind towards another person won't be a matter of hours. It is a matter of years maybe, but we can help them to do that. So don't get me wrong, and I didn't say, well, let them fight, but the only real solution is to change your mind, and we can help each other to do that.
Certainly. I mean, all international connections with Syria, I mean, those are there. So there is really possibilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. And here another question. When we think about peace here, how does that affect the whole? What kind of process is that? Yeah, what kind looks like?
Well, that's a good question, and I would like to talk about that next week when we have much more time.
Yeah.
Because it's a very important thing, very important question. Well, you can, in a few words, resonating. When you have a certain vibration, For instance, the A string on your guitar, the bass A, if you strike that bass A on your guitar, the other string who is tuned in A, maybe an octave higher, will vibrate as well. So our thoughts are vibrations. So if we vibrate in a certain quality of thought, compassion, impersonal, insight, all those thoughts that are higher than our personal thoughts, then we create an atmosphere. And people who are more or less tuned in that atmosphere can get their inspiration from that. And thus we in a real way attribute to the peace if we think peaceful thoughts. But I want to talk about that next week in our study, because there's a lot more to say about that.
More to say about it.
So welcome everybody. Help us to make this clear, because we are students also. We don't have all the wisdom. So we are very happy with all the students next Sunday who help us to make that beautiful picture of a peaceful world.
And here is another question. Why are people ignorant about their spiritual essence?
Yes, that is a question that is addressed in the second lesson of our course, Universal Wisdom. And we use there the metaphor of Plato. But in general, you may say that we attribute, the human mind attributes reality to something that is an illusion. He thinks that this outer world, a world manifestation, that is real, but it isn't real. It is just a reflection, so to say, a shadow of something which is more real, the spiritual world. And because we are so focused on the outer world, we think that this is the only reality. And that's why we don't perceive who we really are. And we have to learn two things. First of all, we have to see that the outer world is an illusion. An illusion doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but that it exists because there is something real, more real, that is working through it or behind it. And the second thing is we have to start to know that world that is behind it, the consciousness that is behind this. And that consciousness is composed of seven, but you may say 3 layers as well, or qualities. And the quality that we call impersonal, or we call spiritual, or maybe even divine, is a consciousness that makes us sense, makes us perceive the interconnections between all those living beings, or even make us feel the unity behind everything. And we can evaluate that aspect of our consciousness by focusing on it. If you try to do the exercise that William Conchurch gave us, and if you really try to go in your mind to your friends and your enemies, if you have them, if you try to meditate on all living beings, you really reach the oneness. Just step, not the first time, but if you try to do it various times, and in a certain moment you see in the eyes of your neighbor, even if your neighbor is teasing you, for instance, you see in him the divine light behind the personality. But there's something we have to train. We have to train our inner human being, the Christos, the Christ, the Buddhi, which in us. And it's a good time in December. It's a good time because the Christus child can be born in us.
Yeah. Clear. And here is a question. How can you keep a practical one trusting or seeing, for example, your colleague as a human being when your colleague keeps fighting you? So perhaps.
Yeah, I understand it. Well, I don't say it's easy, but try to find something in the person who probably dislikes you that is a noble. Maybe he is good for his dog, or maybe he likes very much his mother, or maybe he does his work very, very good, or whatever it may be. And the second thing, well, if he doesn't like you, you choose your own friends and you choose your own enemies. Though the cause of the relationship and maybe the enmity between you and your colleague is also for a part your cause. You have created it. And that is hard sometimes, and that doesn't make us popular. But the truth is that you choose your own enemies and your own friends. Now, if you know that you probably, not probably, for sure, have chosen that person to be your enemy, well, that helps you to be more tolerate in relation with him or her. So try to, not that you should accept all the bad things he does towards you. Of course not. You don't have to accept injustice, but stay with a calm, compassionate mind. Don't keep calm. Yeah. Then you resolve the problem. Maybe you can add
opening. You make an opening, in fact, for you may say another kind of relation.
Yeah. Well, I can say from a personal experience that if you stay calm, even when a person attacks you, wants to attack you physically, and if you stay calm, really calm, and you don't feel any anger or any hatred, it has an effect on the other person. I saw him, in my case, I saw the person change in 1 second, And there are many stories of those very advanced human beings like the Buddha and Mahatma Gandhi also, who, because they were so compassionate and so full of impersonal love, that even those who want to kill them, changed their mind. And so, well, I don't want to compare myself with those really great people, but in our situations, we could at least try to stay calm and try to stay compassionate, even if we have to suffer, because of course it's not nice when somebody want to fight with you, want to quarrel with you, or want to bully you. Of course that is not nice. But always remember, I'm going to say it in the third part as well, for bullying or fighting, you need at least two persons. And if one doesn't want to fight or doesn't feel that the other is bullying him, there is no bully, there is no humiliation, there is no fight.
And the last is not really a question, but a kind of, I think, very good conclusion from someone. This means, here. One of your slides, that was a former slide, says, thinking thoughts is emitting thought impulses. That means that I can make in my thoughts a difference by thinking peaceful thoughts. I cannot make peace for any man or country, but this is something I can contribute, especially when I live those thoughts in daily life.
Exactly. Yeah. And be careful with thoughts, because thoughts are really, you have to be really impersonal if you try to change the individual life of a person. Don't do that. Don't do that, because you know that is his or her karma, his obligation to change something. But in general, if you think peaceful thoughts, think about just, righteous, a society where everybody contributes and where there is harmony and everybody is helping each other, etc. Those thoughts really, really help if we really are compassionate. You know, Catherine Tingley, she wrote about that. If we were aware of the transmissions, the emissions that leave us, if we could see it, could perceive it, we cannot, because we cannot see thoughts, but there are real things, real streams of consciousness, you know, that really affect others. We can be a consolation for those who mourn. We can be a consolation. We can be an inspiration for those who want to make peace in other countries. It's a real fact.
That those were the questions.
Okay, thank you, Henk. Well, we are talking about reconciliation. In the alchemy of war to peace, and it doesn't matter whether it is an individual or collective matter, it is necessary that you experience something of the essential oneness of life, or at least that you realize that we are interconnected and thus depend on each other. At least something of that realization must be there if you want to come to reconciliation with your enemy. Now, you have hopefully noticed that in the title, enemy is in quotation marks, because enmity doesn't exist. It's an illusion. Because if it's true that we all spring from the same source and thus are composed of the same life, then we are brothers to each other, parts of each other. Hating and wanting to hurt the enemy means wanting to hurt yourself. And somebody doing something like that suffers from a very severe constriction of consciousness. Well, in this third part of the talk, I would like to discuss 3 forms of reconciliation with the so-called enemy. And I will give examples of different situations which overlap a bit, and in which always, as in that wonderful example of William Quine Church, we have to come to some realization that we are Brahma, to use that term, or that we are the unity. Then it is much easier to reach reconciliation. The first case is when you have defeated the enemy. You belong to the victorious party. The enemy who has caused a lot of suffering has been defeated. How do you deal with him? 2, you belong to the party that is oppressed. You are being wronged. How to act? And 3, there will be negotiations between the warring factions. Do feelings of revenge and retaliation play a role? Well, let's start with that first one. The war has been won, so to speak, and as a matter of fact, this occurs in a small way almost daily. Take as an example our justice system. The thief or rapist was caught. Do we want to punish him as severely as possible? Do we want revenge? Do we want him to suffer as much pain as possible? Do we want the death penalty? Our laws talk about retribution. But is that right? Does it make sense? We can also think of the lawbreaker as a patient, a weakling. And by means of compassion, we will have to instill in him or her something of an awareness of unity, of responsibility towards others. We already pointed you to ex-prisoner director Franz Dow, who showed very well that it's quite possible to educate the lawbreaker. This works much better than retaliation and harsh punishment. We have been implying talks on this topic and demonstrated several times in Lucifer, the Lightbringer, through examples, that this gentle handling of offenders leads to lasting solutions. Punishment and revenge increase this harmony. Mildness creates harmony. Also in the international world, in international politics, this forgiving attitude will yield far greater results. And in doing so, you must remember well that international politics is nourished, yes, I even think assuming karma, group karma, is determined by all the individual of a country. A wonderful example of such an atoning attitude was Jewish violinist Yehudi Menuhin, of whom Albert Einstein said when he heard him play, "Now I'm sure God exists." Menuhin was the first Jewish musician to perform after World War II in Germany. In the year 1948, he went on tour in Germany. And he additionally called for the rehabilitation of German conductor Wilhelm Furtwängler, who allegedly collaborated with the Nazi regime. Menuhin was highly criticized for his atoning attitude. Jewish pianist Arthur Rubinstein called him a bad Jew. When Menuhin was asked in an interview whether he had no problems performing in Hitler's Germany, he replied, "I'm not performing in Hitler's Germany, but in that of Beethoven and Mozart and Brahms." Well, there is a lot of depth in this answer. Think about it. Focus on the good aspects of the other person, because there will undoubtedly be good qualities as well. If you focus on the bad traits and criticize those bad traits, then this will only increase in strength. Menuhin, as can best seen from his subsequent life, from his views on music, for instance, he did not limit himself to Western classical music, but also had a great appreciation for Indian ragas, for example. In short, it was evident from his entire philosophy of life that this master violinist assumed an underlying unity. As a universalist, he did not join the smear campaign against German conductor Furtwängler, who was later exonerated, and he could perceive in the German nation the noble qualities as well. What Yehudi Menuhin did in a grand way on small scale, in fact, happened in the big world as well. After World War I, Germany, as the losing party, was imposed reparation payments, which increased the poverty, the resentment and hurt in feelings and self-esteem in Germany in such a way that those reparation payments were to a very large extent the cause for Germany's aggression and thus for the Second World War. Catherine Tingley, the third leader of the Theosophical Society, Point Loma, warned about this in the 1920s of the 20th century. You see, revenge and retaliation only lead to new war. After World War II, Germany, which was then divided into West and East Germany, became already rather quickly assimilated into the European family. And after centuries of wars in Europe, between Germany and France in particular, we have had peace for over 80 years now, at least in Western Europe. And you see, no revenge, No retaliation from the winning side, but the Marshall Plan to help the defeated enemy. It has brought us much greater prosperity and peace than reparation and retribution for suffering inflicted after World War I. The second example then, you belong to the oppressed party. How can you achieve reconciliation with the oppressor, the wrongdoer? The most common way to fight injustice is of the attack, if I may call it so. And that attack is primarily motivated from being against the other party. We recently wrote an article about that in Lucifer, the Lightbringer. The danger of being against is that you only reinforce the thought images of what you are against. You put the focus on the perceived enemy, on the government, the owner of the factory, or whatever it may be. It is already a little better when you not playing the man, but even better if you don't consider the wrongdoer an enemy, but a human being. As you yourself become more human, you will also continue to see the other person as human. And the crazy thing is that despite the injustice, the indignities that the other person may do to you, you never feel humiliated yourself. There is a quote from Etty Hillesum, the Jewish young woman who, despite the indignities and suffering of World War II, never lost human dignity. She said, humiliation requires two human beings, one who humiliates and the other being humiliated. And if the other person does not feel humiliated, then there is also no humiliation. It is this thought that some Palestinians who had to suffer humiliation again and again, all those humiliations inflicted by the Israeli soldiers and the settlers on their land, those Palestinians used this quote as an inspiration. It helped them to see the other person as a human being. Even better than seeing the perceived enemy as human is to see him as a friend, crazy as it may sound. The example of this is Mahatma Gandhi in his freedom struggle for an independent India. India was a British colony, and the Indians wanted their freedom back. They wanted to chart their own course. But unlike so many wars of liberation, Gandhi wanted that the British would leave India as friends. And friends, you don't harm. Friends, you don't hate. But if your friend does something wrong, and that was the case in India because Indians were considered second-class citizens, then you tell him that. And you tell him that in a friendly way, but also in such a way that he hears it. You could say a lot about Gandhi's non-violent struggle in which he assumed ahimsa, the philosophy that you may not harm any living being, neither in thought nor in deed. His actions were and still are known worldwide. Gandhi, inspired by the non-violent chains, by Theosophy, and in particular by the Bhagavad Gita, explicitly assumed unity. The injustice he perceived was not consistent with that image of unity and brotherhood. There is a tendency to forget that Gandhi not only fought for an independent India, but also for a harmonious and just India. His famous hunger strikes were meant to awaken his countrymen from their selfish illusion. Such as those that the Dalits, the so-called untouchable casteless, were not allowed to enter the temples, or for the abolition of the miserable child marriages, which, by the way, still exist in India. Starting from unity, he was, of course, I would like to say, a strong opponent of dividing British India into a Hindu and Islamic part. History has proven him right, because by that division and the arousal of religious feelings of hatred, millions of people have been killed. And there have been many wars between Pakistan and India, and for that matter, between Pakistan and East Pakistan, today's Bangladesh. Gandhi's greatness can be seen in his hunger strike in Kolkata to reconcile the two warring factions. A Hindu fanatic approached him during his hunger strike, threw him a piece of bread, and yelled for him to eat, because when Gandhi didn't eat, he would die, and the fanatic would go to hell. After all, he had killed a Muslim boy, because his Hindu son had also been killed. Note the advice of Gandhi. It's the epitome of reconciliation with your enemy. He said, I know a way you can get out of that hell. Find a Muslim boy whose father was killed, take him into your home, and give him an education, but make sure it is a Muslim education. I think many of us will not yet be capable of such a sublime form of reconciliation, but we can make a start to at least not hating those who wrong us. After Gandhi, there have been plenty of people who have practiced this philosophy of ahimsa. Consider the civil rights struggle of Martin Luther King Jr. I'm not claiming it's easy. It's an arduous process. Who knows how many lives we are bound together by hatred and resentment? How many times in past lives we have faced each other instead of standing side by side? But it's the only way out of the misery of violence and war and animosity. It works. Finally, how can we behave like this during negotiations in such a way that we come to a reconciliation with the other? Such situations occur very often in everyday life. And you come across this in relationship therapies, negotiations, in divorces, etc., etc. The question is, how do the parties see each other? As opponents? Should you get as much out of the negotiation as possible for your own party? Or could you not assume unity? Could you not assume common interest here too? If you win a negotiation and the other loses, then you have actually created a new conflict. The important thing is that both sides win. The solution must be acceptable to all. And I don't just mean that sometimes you have to add water to the wine, though that's already better than sticking rigidly to your own point of view. But above all, you have to understand the other person. You need to understand his possible fears, to understand his norms and values. You must immerse yourself in the other person. You have to see him as a human being. Wonderful example of someone who did this to perfection was South African leader Nelson Mandela. Let me read you a quote from General Constant Viljoen, the representative of the white Afrikaners in South Africa, a man who wanted to start a war against the newly released Mandela. They sat opposite each other in negotiations for a new South Africa. Viljoen recounts, Mandela, he asked me if I took tea. I said yes, and he poured me a cup. He asked me if I took milk. I said yes, and he poured me milk. Then he asked me if I took sugar in my tea. I said I did, and he poured me the sugar. All I had to do was stir it. Little things, but you show that you see the other as a human being and not as an opponent. And in the conversation, Mandela reveals that he had studied the culture and history of the Afrikaners. He made an impression when he discussed the similarities between the freedom struggle of Conrad Viljoen's grandparents against the British 100 years ago and Mandela's own struggle against apartheid. But most importantly, Mandela addresses the white farmers in their own language. Generally, he says in Afrikaans, there can be no winners if we go to war. A constant Viljoen's not. There can be no winners. And negotiations began indeed with secrecy, which would last 4 months. No one knew about it, but this was a crucial moment as the general decides to lay down his arms and enter the elections with his own party. The danger of civil war had passed. Well, dear friends, do not think that Mandela, Gandhi, and Mahuni Wenewin are exceptions. At least they need not to be. All of us can develop a mindset that makes us capable of such great acts of peace as they did. It takes just a few guidelines, which, at the conclusion of this talk, I would like to share with you. 5 guidelines, which are not too heavy for anyone. Here they are. 1. Never take revenge. Revenge, retaliation, is the instigator of new wars. Think of thoughts as living beings and you understand how destructive even feelings and thoughts of revenge are. 2. Never justify yourself. Perhaps a little bit more difficult than the first guideline. And why is it difficult? Because the personality feels wronged. Because the personality feels disadvantaged. But the personality doesn't have to be in charge. Once you understand that it is not about the ego, about your I, but about the greater we, then it's not difficult to put yourself not in the center, and you no longer have any tendency to justify yourself constantly. This ties in very well with the 3rd guideline. Don't worry about real or imagined insults. How much suffering will you save yourself if you do not feel insulted all the time? Laugh at yourself a little bit more. Put in perspective the importance of personal opinions and misadventures. 4. Learn to forgive. Learn to love. How liberating that is. What bliss you experience through impersonal love towards others, towards all humanity as a whole. Humanity is the great orphan, dejected, without purpose. How easy it is to love humanity. Know that everyone is in its heart a God, a divine being. Try to see and awaken the noble and the divine in the other. And 5, control yourself. Keep peace. Be silent. Be calm. 5 guidelines that, when applied, make every person a peacemaker. Worth trying, I think. Well, there is another 3-minute break. Ask your questions and then we meet each other in 3 minutes. Well, welcome back. Maybe there are some questions, Henk?
Yeah, there are two questions for the moment. And the first one is this. After the last thing you said about the five your main guidelines, now we can train ourselves to make those 5 guidelines our own. What can we do when you see someone around you who wants to take revenge on someone else?
Yeah. In the first draft of this lecture, I had a part of mediation, but there was not enough time. So I would like to say something about it, but sometimes you have to choose what you think is the most important. But it's very important, not just between 2 persons, but also between countries. Well, first of all, you have to stand above the parties. You shouldn't take part. You shouldn't choose for one or the other. And it's not easy, but you must try to create an atmosphere in which those 2 parties feel relaxed, feel at ease. Sometimes a good joke is helping that. And then, of course, you cannot reconcile the 2. They have to do it themselves. Yes, they have to come to the conclusion that revenge or retaliation or fighting doesn't work. The only thing you can do is help to create the atmosphere wherein it's possible for them, it's easier for them to come to a certain agreement. And of course, you can help with creative ideas or with some plans or whatever. But don't think that you can make the peace for them. They have to do it themselves. Because if you take part in the quarrel, there are not 2, but there are 3 fighting, and that's even worse. And it's not so easy to stand above all parties. For instance, if our country, if the Netherlands want to help to make peace between the Palestinians and the Israelis, it's almost impossible because our government chose one side. So if there is any country that really wants to negotiate and help those parties to bring together, it should be a country or an organization that is above all the parties. And we talked about that 2 weeks ago, the court here in The Hague, but you have to create a situation in the world that all the countries recognize, acknowledge the Supreme Court of the world, and the court here that resides in the Peace Palace. And those churches should be, in fact, above all parties, impersonal men, and they shouldn't have more sympathy for one country than for another. In fact, that's the world conscience. And we talked about that 2 weeks ago, that we should try to make it a stronger power in the world. But in small, we can do the same, of course, to be, impersonal, wanting to help, but not choosing one side or another.
I can also imagine that when you have that attitude, that one of those parties, or perhaps even both, will feel that and will ask to you advice. So we are in the problems. Do you have an idea? Mm-hmm. So I think that is really sometimes the case, because they feel hey, this person can say really something worthwhile.
Yeah. In some primary schools here in the Netherlands, they have a project for a couple of years, and peaceful school it's called, I think. And then the pupils of the higher groups should operate as a mediator if in the lower groups some children are quarreling, and sometimes it's very stupid things. He had my pen, or he had my bike, or something like that, and they should learn to stop that quarrel and to reconcile those two children. So it's very good to train it as a young child, because it's important.
Yeah, very good. Here I have a question. There is a kind of old verb or proverb: do good and do not look back. What does that mean in this case?
Well, if you do good and you do look back, then you are kind of then you are proud. Look at me, I did it. It's something, another proverb in the Netherlands: don't let your right hand know what your left hand does. It's the same. Do good, be good. Even better than do good, be good. Be an impersonal strength and an impersonal power in the world, in everything you do. If you go to the supermarket, be that impersonal power. If you go to your work, if you take a walk in nature, if you have that mindset, you transmit those thoughts, and you wherever you are and whatever you do, you have the same mindset. So don't be proud. That is stupid about the things you do. Why proud? We are all the same. We come all from the same source. So maybe somebody is more advanced than another. What does it say? Because there are always human beings who are far more advanced than you are. And there are always people who are less advanced than you are. You're always a teacher and you're always a student. So do good and don't look back.
Very good. Those were the questions.
Those are the questions. Okay. Well, just one thing I would like to say. Oh no, first this. Next week, the 8th of April, the 8th of December, we have our study, and I really want to I hope that I inspired you to participate. And we're all students, we're all students, so we learn a lot from each other. So if you want to participate, you have to fill in, go to our website and leave your email address. We will send you some text from our Theosophical teachers. And then the 8th of December, we talk with each other, as friends, as brothers, and try to get more insight in those very important doctrines of karma, and especially how to make peace. Then there is another thing I would like to say to you, and that is we have written our Lucifer, an edition of Lucifer in English, of course, but this edition, this peace edition, this peace issue of Lucifer the Lightbringer, you will find a lot of ideas, many more ideas than I was able to share with you, but a lot of those ideas I took from that Lucifer, but there are many other ideas. Now, this issue is available, and you may have seen it in the break, in 6 languages. German, Spanish, Portuguese, also in Russian. And for your information, people from Ukraine can read Russian very well. All those Lucifers you can download for free from our website. And we think it's so very important that those thoughts are spread among as many people as possible, that I want to emphasize that these Lucifers are there on our website and you can download them for free. Okay, and then we end with the Kai tree of the Rig Veda, and the call to sun is, you know, that eternal element within us, our inner God, our deity, that which is far above the personality. O thou golden sun of most excellent splendor, illumine our hearts and fill our minds so that we, recognizing our oneness with the divinity which is the heart of the universe, may see the pathway before our feet and tread it to those distant goals of perfection, stimulated by thine own radiant light.